All right, good afternoon, everybody. So last event of the afternoon. So I know we're all excited. We're smelling the barn, almost there. So we'll try to wrap this up in time. So we're going to be discussing global payments today. And with me, today's panelists from, we'll go left to right. First is Christina Nicora. She prefers the pronouns she, her. And she is from San Francisco, California, VP of Sales at dLocal, a payments technology platform designed to handle mass online payments in growth markets across Latin America, Asia Pacific, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. Christina's previous experience in payments is at WorldPay and financial systems at Box, Agilent, and Broadcom. She's passionate about helping merchants streamline their e-commerce processes and strategically increase acceptance conversion rates and global user acquisition. Next to her right is Catherine Mcclure, who prefers the pronouns she, her, from Atlanta, Georgia. She's the business development leader for the Americas at PPRO. PPRO provides payment service providers and acquirers with a comprehensive solution for over 140 local payment methods worldwide to increase cross-border e-commerce. She has over 15 years of payments experience focused on managing product innovation and business development teams in card issuer processing and merchant acquiring. Her experience spans the ecosystem of commerce, including emerging technologies, transaction security, blockchain, IoT, EMV, integrated software solutions, and mobile wallets. Yeah.
Sorry,
it's a long list.
Soup.
To Christina's right is Fen Slattery. Fen prefers the pronouns they, them. They are from Chicago, Illinois, and is the accessibility lead and web engineer at Clique Studios, a design and technology company who partners with ambitious teams to create industry-leading digital experiences. They are a web developer who specializes in front-end and accessibility. Fen comes to the world of programming from a psychology and physics background at the Illinois Institute of Technology. Finally, to Fen's right is Steve Klebe, prefers the pronouns he, him, and is from Mountain View, California. Steve is the head of business development for PSP partnerships at Google Pay, a faster, safer way to pay using your phone and apps on the web or in stores. Steve's prior experience in business development at Verifone and CyberSource, and currently serves on the board of directors at Electronic Transactions Association. He has over 35 years of experience in products and services related to financial services industry and payment processing, data security, and authentication. So thank you for welcoming our panelists today. We'll try to keep this session as conversational as possible. So I'll start with a couple of questions and then welcome questions from the audience throughout. If you'd like, you can raise your hand for a microphone or email lee@spridley.com, L-E-E @spridley.com. So the first question we'll kick it off with, what markets are you seeing the most payments innovation in today?
Not here. No, we're seeing bits and pieces of it here, but innovation really is about solving problems. And in this market, there's not a whole lot of real problems to solve. When you think about swiping a card, it's not that hard, muscle memory, we all do it, it's not that big a deal. But when you're dealing with regions that have emerging infrastructure, like China is certainly the example that we all look to, they are able to leap past everything that holds us back and do things like QR payments. That's a huge piece of where we see payments going, and it's certainly expanding beyond China. We're seeing some of it here in the States, but countries like the Netherlands and Belgium, a couple examples I can think of coming to mind that are utilizing QR code payments, because there's a lot more that you can get done in there that you don't get in a pan.
Yeah, so when you go to China, actually, it's funny, I heard this from another panel. If you're trying to give money to a homeless person, he literally will be holding up a QR code. They do not accept any cash there, so we're definitely behind.
I just think, well, how's that going to work with adult entertainment?
I don't think we're going there today.
Okay, well, no. We don't have to go there. Everyone can go there individually.
That's tonight's panel.
Welcome to the 5 o'clock panel, everyone. I'm keeping you guys away from happy hour. I have to entertain you somehow.
It's 8 o'clock somewhere.
Okay, back on topic. How are...
I like this already. This is good. Yes. Keep going. We're good.
It's a fun group.
So,
go ahead, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I would chime in and say India is probably one of the places where pretty significant changes are happening. And the interesting thing about it is the problem they're solving was not necessarily a payments problem, it was a taxation problem. So there's a huge black market economy in India, and a lot of people were not reporting their income. And so the government in India decided that it needed to move aggressively to electronic payments. So the government mandated a universal payment API, open banking standard, and simultaneously a universal authentication standard. And so Google jumped on that, and we launched a product called TES that's now called Google Pay India. And basically, through the app, we're driving person-to-person payments. And literally, it's been live for 18 months, and we have like 50 million active monthly users. So, I mean, it's truly a revolution that's going on in the market in India.
Also, there's a movement. We work mostly in Latin America, in India, and some of these high-growth emerging markets. And although cash isn't as big here, it's quite predominant in Latin America. So there's actually a movement towards digitizing the cash a little bit to make it more online, because they're usually offline, asynchronous payment methods. You have to support a pending status as a merchant. So, for instance, OXXO 2 years ago moved to OXXO Pay through Connecta. Boleto now is not quite instant confirmation, but we started a partnership where it's confirmation within minutes. So there's a movement in the market towards that. It's not quite as innovative as QR codes, but
No, but innovation, again, has to solve the problems that you have.
Exactly,
and when you're in a cash-based economy, because of a variety of reasons, you're unbanked, you don't trust the banks, or like we've mentioned a couple of times today, going to the ATM on Friday, getting all your money out, and then going to the grocery store, right? That's how you live. Payments need to fit how people live, because we've tried in various ways to get people to adopt payment methods that just didn't fit their life, and it just didn't work. Why make me go through extra steps? I mean, a lot of stuff that we've had to do in payments, at least, in more advanced economies, you need a carrot, not a stick. So that's how those types of changes end up happening.
Yeah, what other regulations are driving innovation or hampering innovation in some cases do you see across the globe?
Well, I think your India example was a good one.
The India example is definitely driving innovation. So if it hadn't been for the government, putting out these regulations and mandating adoption, this whole thing would not have been possible. In the U.S., a variety of initiatives like this have been tried, but they never get off the ground because, there's not, sort of a ubiquitous adoption, and we're a very fragmented, marketplace. And even Visa and MasterCard, as powerful as they are, when they try to launch initiatives, a lot of times they fall on a sword because, they can't even rally, their constituents to really get behind anything, consistently.
Yeah, no, good point. And India as well outlawed a lot of their large denomination bills, which had, a definite effect on the cash supply. And that's certainly an example of the kind of stick method. But I think on the carrot side, if anyone's traveled in mass transit, kind of going back to the last presentation, if you've traveled on the underground in London, it's great if you have like an Apple Watch or a device and a wearable that will make your payments, because tap in, tap out, done. You don't have to get anything out. You don't have to do anything. You can do it with your device, and that's the kind of stuff that drives actual adoption around the world.
Yeah, and everyone probably knows that in New York, very shortly, they're going to support open loop. So today you have to go to the machine and buy the card, and put money on the card, and always think about what balance is on the card, et cetera. But, by the end of this year, they're going to launch accepting open loop cards through Google Pay, Apple Pay, et cetera, right at the turnstile.
Very nice. So a question from the audience came in from Fareed. How do you benchmark, or rather, which are the top 3 new payment methods internationally, from both a success rate perspective as well as a cost of payments perspective?
That's a tough question because it depends where you're looking. I mean, you look at the entire globe. Well, certainly, you would look at something like an Alipay or WeChat Pay just because of, just volume, right? More than anything else. But, if you're looking at it from your store's perspective or, or a set of merchants that you have, you can't just say, oh, well, I need those because they're popular, because if China's not your market, Southeast Asia's not your market, those payment methods aren't going to get you as far. Did you have something, then?
I was going to make a joke, so you're
Oh,
good.
no, we need those.
No,
we need those.
No, you're good.
Oh, okay. Tell me later.
I completely agree. I think it depends on the business model. But again, WeChat Pay, Alipay is a must. You're probably seeing some ads as well. A lot of U.S. merchants are accepting more, China Union Pay, but it also depends where your users are. So if you're looking at your product and seeing where the volume of number of users, not necessarily payments yet, because you might not be offering the locally relevant payment methods yet, but if you're seeing that people are on your website trying to engage with you, trying to engage with your product, you probably should be catering to those customers, potential customers, so it really depends.
One of the things we heard earlier from one of our speakers, and I think one of the questions was around accessibility, particularly in meeting government requirements, that type of things. As you're trying to meet accessibility needs for an international payments form, for instance, what are the considerations you need to keep in mind?
Hello. Thank you for asking the question. That's the reason why I'm on this panel. I've been mostly quiet. So it's really interesting, actually, my answer to this is related to that question you asked before of, are there certain regulations that are causing innovation or hampering innovation? It's majorly related to accessibility, because there's such a huge variety in international laws around this. For folks in the audience who weren't here last year to see my fabulous talk on this topic, it's, I'm sure, recorded, but accessibility specifically in this context is the process of designing things for people with disabilities, which understandably is related to discrimination, so there's a lot of laws around it in a lot of countries. So we have certain places that, like the European Union, for example, where there are very strict regulations around digital systems, but only ones that are used by the government. So if you're a government entity and you're taking payments, you have a lot of rules you have to follow, but not if you're in the public sector. Meanwhile, in the US, we have some weird, unclear laws. In Australia, they're very, very specific. So you might find yourself as an American company deciding to expand into Australia, as an example, and having no idea that you had all these rules you needed to be following this entire time. You find yourself perhaps having to redo an entire user interface, a lot, including a mobile app, just to meet accessibility requirements. The same thing is also true if, say, you're based in Japan, as an example, where there are no regulations around accessibility. Attempting to even go into the US, where we have a medium amount of regulations on this topic, is a huge jump. It's a huge change. And like I said, this might end up impacting your entire user interface.
Yeah, also closer to home, Canada. So if you're going to launch in Canada, it's a language issue. So that's an accessibility issue, kind of. But you have to put everything in, French, and not just, but it has to be Canadian French, not, right?
Yeah. And meanwhile, while you're doing that, there's a Canadians with Disabilities Act that's potentially going to pass in the next year or so. So now you have two problems.
Yeah, the other thing that's just popped up, which I think has been in the news a lot, is and the Amazon Go store was the poster child for this issue, and several states have now passed laws that you can't have a store that doesn't accept cash. And so Amazon, bowing to that, has now announced that their Amazon Go stores are going to accept cash. And it's not good enough to just have an ATM over in the corner or something like that. They have to actually now figure out a way to accept cash. So that's an accessibility, to serve the unbanked or the underbanked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No,
And
it's
you can't discriminate.
Yeah, it's a big thing because it's very expensive to be poor.
That's true.
There's things that you have to buy that you wouldn't have to buy, or you could, there's so many different things that impact
services.
check cashing services, all that kind of stuff. Now, the football stadium American football, actually both kinds of football in Atlanta, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, they are a cashless stadium. And what they've done is they put kiosks where you can buy, I believe it's Visa branded prepaid cards, and you can use them outside of the stadium as well. It's going to be interesting to see if someone steps in, Georgia lawmakers
nobody
versus
who's
California.
in the stadium is poor.
Well,
They might be.
there's that.
They
no.
might be poor after they buy the ticket, but they weren't poor when they bought the ticket.
They're proud of their $1 hot dogs. It just costs $100 to get in the door.
Related to that example, though, you were talking about public transit before in New York. In Chicago, there's a similar Ventra system where you're now able to pay with, tapping your phone or using a contactless card. But that card also soon, I think maybe now, is going to have the ability to function as a debit card. So you might have initially gained it to use public transit for some purpose, but if you're a person that doesn't have banking access, due to accessibility or class issues, you're able to use what was intended as a cool innovation in paying for public transit as a payment method anywhere.
Yeah, and speaking on accessibility, you mentioned cash a little bit. In Latin America, there's these vouchers that you may have heard of. There's Boleto in Brazil, OXXO in Mexico. In Argentina, they have two, Rappi Pago, Pago Fácil. But being able to adjust your business model to tap into this wider pool of users. So instead of, for instance, if you're in the advertising space and providing credits post-pay, instead you can create the Boleto option for prepay so people can top up that account. So there are innovative ways, I know we touched on innovation a little bit, that you can take these payment methods that probably aren't meant for your recurring business model even, but make it so that you can expand your reach in all the markets.
Yeah, so what factors go into a merchant deciding to adopt an alternative or a local payment method?
I think it's looking at so when you look at, okay, I'm live in Chile, I'm live in Peru, what does that really mean? Are you just localized with the language? Are you still offering US dollar? You should probably be offering the local currency there. But beyond that, when you're looking at your card split, let's say you're offering Visa, MasterCard, you're probably only tapping into the 20-30% of the card market so that are internationally enabled. There's a lot of cards that are locally issued. So if I live in Colombia and I go to my bank, I'm probably going to be issued a domestic card. There's a lot of them in Argentina. There's one called Naranja. By itself, it's 14% of the market. So you should be really looking at the local culture, the local trends and habits of folks, and not just focus your strategy on how you're doing in the US and mimic that, but really localize when you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Going into a different market is more than just making sure your systems work with their local bank and that you've translated it into their language. Does anybody here work at eBay? No, then I can give an eBay example and not feel bad. So eBay, I think this was late 90s, early 2000s, when they first went into Japan. Pretty much just translated the site into Japanese and hit launch, and it was a horrible disaster because, especially at that time and still very much now, a Japanese consumer wants to look at things differently from an American consumer. That is an entire difference in user interface. It's more than just, well, it's in their language, it should be fine. You really have to be talking with actual experts, namely the people who are in that culture that you're looking to expand into.
Yeah, and so Germany, for example, if you launch in Germany and you don't accept ELV or bank transfers, you're just wasting your time.
All right, so how about any questions from the audience? I haven't gotten any more emails yet.
Economy is to be mobile first at scale, right? And a related question is also, why is it also that much more difficult in the US for standards to evolve and be accepted? I mean, we're doing EMV when we're already talking about PSD2, 3DS2 elsewhere.
So a quick history lesson is like chip cards, for example, have been prominent in Europe for almost 2 decades, I think. And the reason originally why chip cards were successful was because phone lines were not accessible. So merchants, fraud started going out of control. And so there needed to be a way to do transactions offline. And the way to do that was to have the local intelligence on the chip. Well, here in the US, we've been spoiled because we have cheap and readily available telecom. And so I worked at Verifone for 9 years, and we deployed millions of point-of-sale terminals over dial-up lines. Merchant could call AT&T or whomever and get a phone line installed in 2 days, and it rarely, if ever, went down. And so we got sort of just lazy as a result of that, and there was no compelling reason, to switch to the chip cards. Whereas in many other countries, the infrastructure didn't exist, so they had to be resourceful and leverage other techniques. Throughout Africa, mobile payments, have become extraordinarily popular because, again, the infrastructure didn't exist. The other big thing about the U.S. market is it's so fragmented. Like in a place like Canada, they were so successful. The 5 banks got together and agreed to launch Interac. And in 3 years, the country just was blanketed and debit was everywhere. It suited the culture, but if those 5 banks hadn't agreed to cooperate, but to get the banks in the US to agree to cooperate to do something like that is nearly impossible. So it's just a difference of culture, it's technological need, it's laziness, etc.
And some of it's a scale thing too, I think, because in Canada, it's a smaller amount of merchants to get them to be able to accept contactless cards, as an example. Where here, again, back to the whole carrot stick thing, a merchant who has spent $1,000 on their standalone terminal because they didn't need to upgrade anything because they're a simple donut shop and they don't need to have all this stuff. Why would they want to do it? So one thing with the new Apple Card that's come out, kind of a recent news thing, they made a point of saying, okay, you get, I think it's 1% back if you use the card for a purchase, but if you're able to use Apple Pay, you get 2%. So I think their thought process is that they're going to have this army of card holders out there talking to merchants and going, hey, I'm only getting half my cash back because you have an old funky terminal. That's not nice. And creating almost a negative experience, which would serve as potentially a greater source of adoption to merchants that don't accept contactless. We'll see how that works out.
And you alluded to PSD2 in your question, and there is a big fine if you not meet that September deadline, so the carrot stick is very applicable.
Yeah,
Carrots work better than sticks, I believe.
they do, especially with honey on them.
So
That doesn't happen a whole lot in our industry.
speaking of the PSD2 stick, how is that going to affect innovation in payment methods in Europe? Not only cards, but also mobile wallets, the user experience that goes along with that.
Well, theoretically, once it's deployed, it might be a foundation for more innovation, but from a resource standpoint, for just about everybody in the payment space that's active in the European market, most of this year and probably a lot, it's going to bleed into next year, and a tremendous amount of resource has been distracted, dealing with it, and the specs are not clear. It's been an ugly mess. So right now, it's probably hindering. In the long term, it'll probably create some additional, layers that can be leveraged, but it's short-term distraction.
All right, how about any more questions from the audience? Are you raising your hand or telling me I have 5 minutes? Okay.
Twofer. So, do you think the increase in... Oh, hello. Do you think the increase in technology in regard to making payments and making purchases is making things more or less accessible for the average global citizen? Is it making it harder to pay for things, easier to pay for things? What's just the hot take on that?
I've got a hot take. Yeah. Okay. So a little bit ago when we were discussing the idea of certain states are outlawing merchants not taking cash, as an example. Restricting a user or limiting a user to only certain kinds of payments is inherently, in my professional opinion, going to be less accessible. If you're a merchant, even just that simple like donut shop example you gave, right? There's actually a burger place near where I work that doesn't take cash. And some people are like, oh, cool, hooray, they don't have to worry about cash anymore, it's great. And friends, are happy to pay with a card. But if you're not able to choose to pay in cash, that creates issues around classism, as we discussed. And folks, for whatever reason, don't have a card. But also, if you're choosing to take cash and not a card, you're also limiting access to folks who, for example, have disabilities that make using cash very difficult. Having more options, sure, might muddy the waters, might be confusing, but at the end of the day, you're giving a person more choice, which is good for them. Yeah, hot take.
My not maybe quite as hot take. I think overall, for the average global citizen, they're getting a lot more choices. Parts of the world that had very limited choices are getting a lot more choices. More and more people are joining the global economy and being able to get things from other countries, being able to participate in more things digitally and in their physical world. So overall, for that average global citizen, whoever they are, it's a good thing because they have more choice and more accessibility to more things from around the world.
But it does lead to confusion. As being one of those global citizens, you travel overseas, and if you don't remember to make sure that you have a PIN associated with your credit card and you try to use it in certain situations, it's going to be rejected. Going to various transit systems around the world and just standing there like a deer in the headlights trying to figure out, how you're supposed to pay to get on the train. So choice is good, but the confusion that, comes from that, is a challenge.
Yeah, but I don't think we're all going to just start using Bitcoin, so it's same for everybody. I'm not saying that as a negative either way, but unless there was a global currency, which is not anything I think we're going to see in our lifetimes, you're still going to have the differences and the challenges. But that average global citizen that may not be, the American having the luxury of traveling overseas, overall the world has become, a smaller place because there's more they can do.
I was just going to agree with specifically, you gave the example. Well, yeah. No, with you. Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, I agree with both of you. But specifically, choice good. I like what you brought up within a specific sector, though. It didn't even occur to me as a citizen of Chicago to imagine a reality in which I could go to New York and use the same card, and now I'm going to go home and be very sad that I can't. But I do think of things, actually, the previous talk about tolling. Being able to use my same transponder when I go to Indiana, when I go to other adjacent states. That's great. I would like to not be confused and overwhelmed by different systems, but have the choice to use what's best for me. You're both right.
And it's very inviting if you're a brand. It almost welcomes this global population in. So there is a little, you don't want to offer everything, but depends on, it's also incentivizing, right? If you're a larger ticket merchant, maybe bank transfer to you is less costly, so you're probably going to want to offer that versus, other options.
Well, great. Well, we're out of time, but I really want to thank all of our panelists today, and also thanks to the audience for sticking around for the last session. We ran a few minutes over, but we do pay overtime here, so since we pay in beer, you get 1.5 times what you were originally allotted at happy hour. Thank you.
Thank you.